Hi and welcome to Straight Out of Camera, proudly sponsored by Fujifilm South Africa. It's episode 6 and the genre we'll be discussing today is underwater portraiture photography. Joining me in studio is Managing Director of techsmart.co.za, Mike Hubert, and from Cape Town, commercial photographer Leon Westhaven. How are you doing, guys?
Hi, Ashley. All well, thank you.
Hi. I'm fantastic down in Cape Town, thank you.
Mike, it is a very interesting genre as there's a lot of aspects on shooting underwater portraiture which could necessarily work against a photographer. Things like how the model will react to cold water, how the clothes will flow in the water, and not to mention controlling the light.
Yeah, definitely. I think underwater portrait photography has some really great payoffs. The photos look absolutely amazing and gorgeous. But boy, if it goes wrong, it can go seriously wrong. You've got water everywhere, a model that doesn't respond well to the cold, and gear that fails. You know, I think I can barely get the stars to align on dry ground, never mind underwater.
The whole idea of underwater photography is quite interesting because typically what we think of are the National Geographic kind of pictures of fish and manta rays and that kind of stuff. But when we're talking about portraits, it's a whole different thing. I find this very intriguing because I haven't had a go at it myself. And I'm quite interested to hear from our guest a little bit later on how exactly she got into it. But for the whole idea of underwater, there are quite a lot of limitations, I think, that are set. Obviously, firstly, you have to be underwater with oxygen and you have to somehow breathe. I'm not exactly sure how we get around those kind of things, or do you just shoot really shallow stuff and take gasps and work quickly? And then my biggest concern actually is how do you deal with color, because water filters light out and deals with color in a very different way. So those kind of things are technical limitations that I find quite intriguing. What do you think about those, Mike?
Well, I think, you know, you're talking about light and how it gets absorbed into water, the red spectrum that usually falls away. One of the groundbreaking pioneers in that regard was a Frenchman called Auguste Boutin, who is said to have taken the world's first underwater portrait in 1899. That's about the same year that the start of the Second Anglo-Boer War. It's a shot of a diver, obviously in full diving suit, taken at a depth of 50 meters. The interesting thing is that at that depth, the available light becomes a major problem. So Mr. Boutin designed his own underwater flash rig, consisting of, and get this, an alcohol lamp, an oxygen-filled barrel, and a magnesium powder light. It's a massive contraption which took loads of effort to ensure that, firstly, it doesn't just explode, and secondly, that it's also waterproof. It again goes to show that at the start of photography, a lot of the innovation was driven by private individuals and not companies.
Yeah, it's the adventurous spirit, I think, that leads us to go to places that are less familiar. We're trying to push the boundaries. It's familiarity breeds contempt, and I think if you shy away from that, then by nature you're an adventurer, you're a creative, you're an artist. You need to know more. I think that's an adrenaline rush that a lot of us can associate with.
For sure.
Yeah. So when we take a look at underwater photography, I've come across the work of a lady called Elena Callis. I hope I said her name right. And she did a series of underwater pictures of her daughter, actually. And if you Google that, you just go Alice in Wonderland underwater, and there's a series of seriously beautiful, very surreal pictures. And she plays with where we think gravity comes from and how things work, where some of the stuff floats in the water, some of it is suspended. So she really plays around with the concept of where things are. It's not just the fact that it's underwater, but also conceptually she tries to play into something that's a bit more abstract. Have you come across anything else that fits a genre, or maybe takes it to a completely different level?
Well, I think two of my favorites is a London-based photographer called Zena Holloway. Her images have this ethereal but still very stylistic feel to them. Same can be said of New York photographer Michael David Adams. Both of them have shot these big international advertising campaigns underwater. In South Africa, perhaps we can look at Ilse Moore, who has some excellent work. Underwater fine art stuff is breathtaking. It can be described as mystical, otherworldly, almost dreamlike. And she certainly doesn't have to stand aside one bit for any of the big international names. Many of our listeners might have seen her live demonstrations at the annual Photo Film Expo up here in Joburg. And our guest today, Yolandi Jacobsz, is also well acquainted with Ilse since she has actually been a model in one of her shoots.
Follow us on SOC_live, both on Instagram and Facebook, where we will provide links to the photographers featured by Mike and Leon.
brandlive.co.za.
Have you ever thought about the power of social media? Social media has the power to make your business grow. Grow! Yeah. Why don't you let us manage your social media? Because our business is to see your business grow. Visit us at www.bstownmedia.co.za.
Yolandi Jacobsz is a Gauteng-based portrait photographer, perhaps best known for her 15 iconic women series, where she captured herself as some of the most famous females in history. She's skilled in shooting models and families in studio, with a strong interest also in boudoir photography, keeping this well separated from the corporate shoots she does. Always one to push her boundaries, Yolandi has brought her love of photography to the water, taking up the challenge of underwater portraiture. She notes, "I've always said photography is not my passion. It is everything I nurture and give my time, effort, money and sleepless nights to. I didn't find photography, it found me." Yolandi, thanks for joining us. When did your passion for photography first start?
Well, after school, we moved to Portraiture and we enrolled me in the National College of Photography, and this was in 2004. And one of our mentors were Martin Osner, a renowned landscape photographer. So,
Great stuff.
Yolandi, I had a look at your work, and it looks so ethereal and like everybody is just suspended in midair. When you take a look at the getting somebody in the water, what would be your first instruction to them?
what I really wanted to do is that I wanted my work to look quite dreamy. You know, I wanted to create what I saw in my dreams, kind of underwater. So, underwater photography is everything you think it isn't. So a lot of the instruction and the posing and the guiding happens above the water. So you have to try and articulate well what you want to have it look like above, and then you go down with the model yourself, and then you hope for the best. And that's why you shoot a lot, because in that whole set of images you are sure to get the right one. But hair does its own thing, and limbs does its own thing, and sometimes the face does its own thing. So it's quite a mission just to try and get that right shot.
Yolandi, talking about gear, you need to have some sort of underwater housing. Can you give us a little bit of information about that, how you maintain that housing, and also what focal length you use when shooting underwater portraiture?
Okay. I do use the Fuji X series system, so I have an XT2 that I use underwater. I have a Brother housing as well. Brother is also a South African company. They're based in Durban. Great housings that they do have. They're easy to use. The Brother, the only thing with the Brother housing is that you can't change any settings underwater. So you have to make sure of your settings above water, and then you clean and fasten your housing above. So you have to make sure that when you get out of the water again, especially if it was salt water, that you rinse it off well and that you air dry it for a couple of days quite well, so that there's no water left inside your housing or on top of any of the rings or where it fastens well, because you can erode the plastic and the rubber quite hectically. With the Brother housing as well, I think you do get them with others. You get some silicone wax as well, that you have to make sure that you maintain the rubber of your O-ring, that it stays healthy and that it doesn't crack. And because that's your saving grace. That's the part where if water comes in, it will come into where cracked rubber is.
So the focal length that you normally shoot?
I usually shoot either with my 16 to 55 or with my 10 to 24, and with both of them I see that I usually open it up to around about 20. You kind of put it into the housing and then you set it already to there. With the Brother housing, because you can't do any of the settings afterwards, or inside the water, you can't change anything. I open up my aperture to about 4.5. I leave my ISO round about at 400. I try not to go above, because in the water you try and get everything as clear as you can. So as little as possible grain or noise. and then I let the aperture or the shutter speed actually run automatically. So it chooses its own shutter speed.
Where do these shoots take place?
Usually at a pool where both of us mutually agree on. So it's usually wherever we find a pool that will work. I would not advise a blue pool because I've seen this in previous shoots. It's quite a hectic blue, and your subject, whether far away from you or even close, it's almost as if there's this very thick blue barrier between you and the subject. This reflects from everywhere in the pool. So I would rather advise like a light pool or a dark pool, which has a great color. I haven't tried it myself yet in a dam or in the ocean yet. So with what I've done, I'm quite new with it. I like the dark look.
I think with the pool though, you have a higher hit rate of having clear water, because I mean otherwise you always down to the condition of the visibility in the sea, which may or may not be helpful to you.
Yes.
So I think a pool might be a bit better like that. And when we talk about visibility, we also immediately talk about light. How do you solve your lighting problems when shooting in water?
Yeah, I would say if possible, it has to be a pool as clean as it can be. What I usually do is that with what I tried, I really like the natural light. I haven't yet done it with any strobes or any sort of other big lighting setups inside the pool or even outside. So I like natural light. I usually have somebody helping me, pointing a reflector down at the model. So I try and do the shoots around about at 2-3 o'clock, going even later in the afternoon when the sun sits a little bit lower, and then the reflector actually works great. And then for some additional and full lighting, I use nifty little lume cubes, which helps a lot to illuminate faces or other parts that I just want to have some light on. So those actually work well. They're waterproof. So with help from somebody outside, you can actually get a great, clear, bright image.
It seems like there's quite a bit of planning that goes into these shoots. How long does it take you to plan ahead on these photos?
With the shots that I've done so far, there's a lot of planning that actually goes into it because I really, really want to try and get the dream element. So a lot of the stuff that you'll see has some arty headpieces or bodices that I've made myself because I want my stuff to really look different, to represent me a lot, and I want it to be fun and as breathtaking as it can be.
Yolandi, when you edit your images, how much do you change the color? Because I know when you go underwater, the color does filter out. You mentioned already not shooting in a blue pool, but light does change underwater. Do you have special filters, or do you just put it on underwater white balance, or how do you deal with your color underwater?
Well, I keep the white balance to auto before you go down. It's also one of the settings that you set, and then you just play. I use Camera Raw in Photoshop, so you just play until you kind of feels that it gives you the color that you want. With some of them, you really drastically change colors. You take a lot of the hectic colors out. Maybe you don't want the yellow as yellow, but blue can be quite difficult to deal with, and that's why I like the dark pool. So I just play. I play until it feels like the skin tones look good and whatever the model was wearing looks good. And that's why a lot of planning goes into this, because I really want it in my mind. I've already seen a picture of what I feel it should look like. So, and then I go and try. That's why I also shoot in RAW. Your cards do get quite full. And then I go and change it in Camera Raw to make sure that I get the exact color that I want. Some of them we change a lot. You put smoke, you add smoke, you add paint splatters, so it helps to. It's a dream, and it's fun to really make it as I see in my head. It's great to play.
You said that you direct the model before going down. Just tell us a process on when both of you are submerged. How do you take the image? I know, like just the hair of the model would be difficult to control. How do you go through that process? How do you shoot it? If you can just explain that.
you should know what you're working with. You should know that that is going to happen. When a model goes straight down in water, her hair goes straight up. So there's moments that you wait for when the hair kind of just settles and goes down. When she turns her head, the hair can go over her face, which maybe you want or you don't. So on top, or when you're not submerged yet, you kind of try and explain to her exactly what type of look it is that you want. Some of them are not comfortable opening their eyes, which is fine. And you try and always have very dainty poses. So it's pointed hands and arms and very pointed toes. So that is very, very important to have a flattering look.
What I like about your photos is sometimes that you play with the reflection on the surface of the water. Is that something you aim for?
Not really. I like the fact that I go low enough that I don't always see the reflection. So it's more as if they are coming through clouds or as if they are flying. So I sometimes use the reflection, which can be very, very powerful, especially if they have something colorful that they are wearing. But it's something that it works for some and for some it doesn't, but it's not always my aim.
Yolandi, when we take a look at your work, of course, it's very dreamlike and ethereal. I want to delve a little bit more into your concepts and how you create your images. From what space do you create, and who inspires you? How do you come about deciding how the images are going to end up?
I usually start with a concept because a lot of my stuff it's a bodice or a headpiece that I make. So I start with something like that, and then I try and see whom in my friend list or who knows somebody that will work with that, and then I start planning the shoot around that. And when I make these things, it gets its own life and shape and form. So it's not sometimes it's a big plan, but sometimes it happens the way that it should. So it's not necessarily that I work only with models. If I find somebody that I feel might have a great look underwater, then I ask them and let's see if we can make good images.
In the Jungian sense, water has to do with subconscious. And if you look at underwater portraiture, there is a sense of otherworldliness about it. Do you find that capturing these photos triggers something in you that regular photo shoots don't?
Very, very much so. It's very much about the dream. I want it to look like a dream. Esli mentioned Ilse Moore, and she's a great inspiration for me. I think she has this whack. She knows exactly what she's doing. She understands her light. She knows her setup, and I've learned a lot from her. I took a workshop from her and actually tried this out myself. So she's somebody that I take a lot of inspiration from. And then people that just shoot very dreamlike, like people like Brooke Shaden. And I recently, not that I think he's only shooting recently, but I found a guy whose work I also like called Brett Stanley. So I just wanted to put my own spin on it. And it's not always that I have a set plan. It takes its own shape. Sometimes when you use balloons, they do their own thing. Or when you use ribbons, they do their own thing. So it takes its own shape. And I like the fact that I can put my own stamp on it.
When you take a look at having some fun underwater, do you have any tips for our listeners, perhaps, if they want to go out and play? Maybe get their toes wet and maybe a bit more. It's a very interesting genre and it looks like a lot of fun. What should they be looking out for?
It is, but you have to make sure that you have a proper housing. There's nothing as heartbreaking as putting your camera underwater and watching it fill up with you you can do nothing about that. So you have to make sure that you have a proper housing that you can use with. And then make sure that you have, if you're using a pool, that it's as clean as possible so that your environment is as easy for you to work with. So you have to make sure of that. Be sure that you have proper lighting because you are literally not going to have any data, any information on your subject if you try and go under and say, I'll do it on a high ISO. It's just not the protocol for it. So I would advise people to make sure that you get a proper housing, make sure that you have fast cards, and that you have a good system that can read that well, that you can render well, that you know your way around Photoshop or even Lightroom, I would say, well, so that you can, it's not just taking the photo. I think it is creating it into something breathtaking, because the editing process of it is really a very big part of it. And so you have to take it further there. So I would say it's fun. You also have to make sure that you can direct your model well to go underwater. You have to understand posing and what is flattering well, and test certain materials to see how they float and what you can do, and test certain colors. But if you're not sure about what you're doing, do not charge yet, and do not go out and handle stuff that you can't yet. So I would rather say just to test it out first. Get maybe a housing that you can borrow or lend or hire, and but test it. It's insane fun.
Are you and your model both using air tanks, or are you just holding your breath in and hoping for the best?
Not at all. If I can punt Ilse here, she always says, if your model is cold, you should be cold. So I don't wear a wetsuit at all. I feel what she feels, and none of us uses air. The weird thing is that before you go under, you actually blow out all of your air, because buoyancy is a big problem, and she does the same as well. So you have to try and have as little air as possible in her lungs. She goes under and she moves, and when she starts panicking or when she really can't hold it anymore, you both come up. So it's a work in progress. You kind of see what you've got, if you can replay on your camera, and then you go under again. So none of us uses air. There's no tanks involved with the way that I do it. I think when you're in the ocean, maybe, or when people go deeper, maybe they do use.
You also do boudoir photography.
Yes.
Are there any lessons that you've learned from there that you take over to underwater portraiture?
Very much so, because there's a flattering way, especially of posing women, and you do take that underwater. It just can look wrong if feet or hands are posed in an unflattering way. So I do take that with me. As I say, it's everything you think it isn't. So hair does its own thing, and shoulders does its own thing, and feet and legs and knees. But I take the posing and the directing that I usually give my boudoir clients as well. I take that as well with me.
Yolandi, when you talk about posing, obviously there are limitations to it, but more in particular, eye contact. Now, I'm one of those guys that when my head goes underwater for anything, I close my eyes. Is that something that you prefer to have as eye contact, or in portraits in this kind of a dream state, do you not worry too much about it?
No. With my normal portraiture and fashion, I also like eye contact. But this is the type of thing where it's almost as if you're intruding into the dream, and it's not about the eye contact at all. So if your model does look at you, it can actually look a bit strange. So I have the model either look up towards the surface of the water or look away from me, but that it does make people feel strange, because you can't see it all. So it makes you feel a bit uneasy. But if you close your eyes as well, it's fine.
Yolandi, where can we find you on social media?
I have a group on Facebook. I'm Yolandi Loci Photography, Yolandi Jacobsz. And then I'm also on Instagram as the Creative Mirror.
Follow us on SOC_live, both on Instagram and on Facebook, where we will share Yolandi's links. Leon, I know this genre is very difficult to imitate. What is our photo challenge for the week going to be?
Isley, I think this is a really interesting photo challenge, because technology has come on a little bit, and a lot of cell phones and smaller cameras come as fully submergible, not just weather sealed, but waterproof. Even if it's only 1 or 5 meters deep, it will allow you to go and experiment. So number one, if you have a phone or a camera like that, I would say absolutely go ahead and see what you can do with that, just to feel it out, get your toes wet in a way. But otherwise, if you don't have an underwater housing for your regular camera, there are a couple of places that rent them out. Just make sure that they are in good condition, or make friends with the people at underwater photography clubs. I know of a couple out in Gauteng, even where people congregate around, specifically going like diving and combining that with underwater photography. So they might actually be good people to combine efforts with if you want to maybe get some tips and tricks on shooting underwater. For those of us that won't go that far, I would maybe just recommend that next time it rains, or if you get yourself close to water, put a pick and pay or a plastic bag from the shops. Just put that over your camera, cut a hole in the one corner, and have an elastic band around it so that your whole camera isn't drenched in water. So the water will fall over it. You still have full functionality, and you're able to shoot in conditions where most other people actually won't consider shooting. So you'll end up with very interesting photographs that you probably won't see all that much. I think that's a good challenge to shoot in adverse conditions when water is involved.
Leon, Mike, where can we find you on social media?
Easily, I'm at leonslens.com, or otherwise Leon Oosthuizen on Instagram and on Facebook as well.
You can check me out at Fark1 on Instagram, and also I think Fark1 on Flickr.
Yolandi, it was great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us in studio. Thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of us.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having
guys.
me.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
brandlive.co.za